Welcome to San Diego. Woo! Hey, I'm Tom Vander. I'm the CEO of Getting Smart. We have some smart people right here. The Getting Smart team is live in the front row. We are at this really interesting moment in time, a really formative period of time where I think we're just about ready to do important work that frames like the next 40 years. And we have maybe the two best people in America here with us to describe what the next 40 years look like. Let me start with Russlynn. Russlynn Ali is the CEO and co-founder of XQ Institute. She's also the managing director of education at the Emerson Collective, which is a very cool next-gen investor in education and democracy and the environment. I had the good fortune to meet Russlynn almost 25 years ago. I was a new grant maker, and Bill Gates and I were just learning about policy advocacy. We didn't know much about it, and then I met Russlynn, and she's like, you actually can change the world with better education policy, and we were able to help her launch Education Trust West in Oakland to really fire up the West Coast to transform education in California and beyond. And we have been partners and colleagues in a lot of different ways ever since. After EdTrust, Russlynn worked with Arnie. She ran the Office of Civil Rights at the Department of Education in the Obama administration. So she's been an equity warrior for a long time. And she's now leading at XQ, I think the most important high school transformation work in America. So welcome, Russlynn. And not coincidentally, I met Dr. Timothy Knowles almost 25 years ago to the date in Boston. I had this really cool fall of 1999 when I met Bill. Bill says, why don't you just travel for 6 months and go visit as many high schools as you can and then come back and tell me what you'd like to do. And on that trip, I met Dr. Knowles, and he and Tom Payson had just developed the smartest, most effective district transformation strategy, where all of his high schools were transforming the quality of instruction, and they were starting brand new schools. Jim Shelton later and I wrote a paper on this portfolio strategy because it was the first time we'd seen an urban district do this beautiful mixture of community-connected improvement and new school development, innovation for equity at scale, done in a way that had never been done. After that important work, Tim spent almost 2 decades at the University of Chicago, and I think he was the most influential education academic in America, not because he was doing academics, because it was really applied academics. You were always deeply involved in the work of Chicago Public Schools, and like Tony Brike before, you guys did local work that was so well done, it was of national importance. And about 3 years ago, Tim took over the Carnegie Foundation for the Advancement of Teaching, and these guys have launched this beautiful partnership that we're going to talk about. But welcome, Tim Knowles. So, Russlynn, I was just, you were talking about this sense of opportunity that you have, but since I'm rambling, let me do just a minute. I did the time machine of 25 years. It's interesting that if you think back to the shape of that 25 or 30 years, they've been shaped by policy, in our case, federal policy, unusually impactful federal policy, the standards movement, standards assessment accountability. Ed tech, right, the rise of education technology and technology-enhanced learning, and new school development. Not just charter schools, but many new schools. Those three vectors were the big change vectors of the last 30 years that have really influenced our career. And Russlynn, you were just saying that you have this new sense of opportunity, that we're at this period where there's shaping to be done. But like, how do you think about the opportunity, the time in history that we're at?
Well, I'm actually, and thank you for dating me, Tom.
It's been a long journey.
Yes. But one that has led me to a place where, honestly, I truly feel more hope than ever before. You described it. We have new models. We have new technology. We have policy opportunities. That is what has underpinned our success so far. But all of those actually wrap around a moral vision for schooling in America that has undoubtedly made us lead the world. We were the first in the world to declare universal high school a right, that the basics of learning didn't stop when one was 10 and 11, but extended into our adolescent years. And in so doing, gave rise to becoming the most important and influential superpower on the planet. Schools are the cure. Why am I hopeful now? Because these things come together around a new confluence of factors. That moral vision, so yes, you described policy, you described technology, you described the models, the wonk behind where we are. That moral vision, that policy vision, the new models where it takes yeoman educators, like so many in this room, to show us how to do it. Actually, technology has caught up with all of those visions.
Yeah.
We are here
in this
room.
You had this big footprint over at the air show. Give it up if you were at the air show the last couple days.
Well, listen.
So,
and I appreciate you saying big footprint, but what was so powerful about that is because we opened up these opportunities to between 10 to 15, I think we were at 14,000 teachers who are actually doing this work every day for free to come and experience the world of ed tech meshing with this moral and policy and practice vision that they execute every day. So what gives me the most hope is because of new and emerging technologies, we can stand on the shoulders of the giants that have done this work for so long. We talk about standards, we talk about accountability, we could talk about Goals 2000 when there was a then governor from Little Rock who was with a then champion running for president that also had the name George and also had the name Bush. And they set about declaring that the money that we said as a country, as we launched the war on poverty after JFK's passing, with LBJ and the rise of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act that said we were going to have a fifth freedom, that freedom from want and to worship and from fear and from tyranny, wasn't enough, that we were going to have a freedom from ignorance, and that we were going to have a Sputnik moment again. And those words and the quest to find alloys not yet made and go to the moon and back gave rise to the largest federal investment in the National Defense and Education Act in our country's history that made schooling the hub, schooling the center.
It was a beautiful bipartisan agreement. It was a coming together that
it was apolitical.
That we'd never seen before.
It was apolitical. We actually were segregated. Remember when, the pictures that matter the most? Yeah. We had white people on one line and black people on another line, and everybody celebrating with the same signs because we had defied science, and we did it with schools at the center. I'm hopeful because we're at that moment again.
We are, and this time we have a chance to get it right in a new way. There's things we got right and things that we got wrong, but we're at a point in time where we can build a new bargain and this time with an instructional vision at the center and a moral vision at the center. Tim, you've heard, many of the people in this audience have heard me claim that I've visited more high schools than anyone on the planet. One thing they all have in common is this thing called the Carnegie Unit. And it's now not only the unit of instruction, it's the unit of reporting and the unit of teacher licensing and the unit of funding. And it was for a while the shipping container of education that sort of made everything efficient. And now it's the boat anchor. Everybody is stuck with this thing with your name on it. And you have this inherited...
He has enough hubris.
You have this inherited culpability. You're the reason that we're all stuck.
I'd love this panel already. So, are you going to ask a question?
How do we get unstuck, and what's your take on this Carnegie Unit thing that you're named after?
I do appreciate the question, because in order to think about a new architecture, we do actually have to understand the one we've got, and we've got to get into it. The place that I'm responsible for, the Carnegie Foundation, in 1906, introduced this thing for a good reason that we don't need to talk about, called the Carnegie Unit, or the credit hour in today's parlance. It is, as you said, Tom, it's instrumental.
It's super important.
It standardized an entirely unstandardized system, and in 4 years, it swept the nation. It was and is the currency, the bedrock currency of the educational economy. It's not just the things you listed, but it's...
In some ways, it was an equity initiative.
Absolutely.
Almost like A to G, because you helped build A to G. Here in California.
Your alphabet's
A to G is the college prep courses that you have to take in California. But it was the same sort of defining the architecture so that more 100%. Students could have access
with
to
a new
quality
kind of immigration
right?
from the South.
So,
now, mind you, we were talking about only white boys allowed in school at the time.
Yes.
So
when it came to higher education, higher order thinking, which was high school and the Carnegie Unit. And your guys swept the whole thing and made equity real for everybody.
So that is the upside. The downside is that it infiltrated everything about how we think about learning, and it is what's on a transcript. The other day we shared a transcript from 1875 and a transcript from last year, and they're identical except one is written in longhand. That's it. So what the two things that it ignored, or it now ignores, one is the incredible amount we've learned about how people learn in the last 100 years, from neuroscientists and cognitive psychologists and learning scientists. We know now that we learn from solving real problems, from experience, from working with peers. We learn at vastly different rates depending on the individual and the subject of study. And yet we are bound by this original architecture that conflates time and learning. And so that's the first problem. The second problem is that it has a pernicious effect on the scale and the pace and the efficacy of innovation. So there have been post-Carnegie or non-Carnegie Unit instantiations of schools since Dewey and Montessori. And they exist today everywhere, and we all know them and are drawn to them, but they've stayed at the margins. They haven't penetrated the mainstream, and so that's why, if we can segue into the forward part of our conversation, that's why a new architecture is critical if we're serious about our democracy and our economy and our social fabric.
Russlynn, anything you want to add about the opportunity set right now? We've been talking about the challenge of the Carnegie Unit, but...
Listen, I mean, when I joke with Tim about his hubris, he doesn't really have it.
I just leave the jokes alone.
I just adore and applaud the courage of a mainstay organization that is 120 years old, whose name, not by self-aggrandizement, became the bedrock, but history is accurate, and history tells us it was the bedrock. It wasn't just, we were talking the other day, I was saying, Tim, dinosaur diplomacy, how it all started, dinosaur diplomacy, because it was Carnegie who had the first fossil of a dinosaur that others around the world wanted to see. And in so doing, the showcasing of that staved off, to my mind, in my read of history, world wars. We hadn't even named them yet. And then the efficiency with which he built a new alloy that would power the Industrial Revolution was brought into how we did schools, because we had 11,000 some odd high schools, again, only teaching one population with one human anatomy for the most part. But there was little to no articulation about what that higher order learning would look like in order to get to an institution of higher education that would foment the skills that you would need to be a successful adult in the world. The Carnegie Foundation brought us libraries. They brought us knowledge acquisition. They brought us not just an equity-minded picture of what high school should be. Shouldn't be just Latin for some and farming for others and banking for a few. That's the way it was. And then a committee of 10 came together alongside folks like Charles Eliot, who wrote a piece in The Atlantic in 1896, if I trust my memory, that called it the new American education, and teamed up with that committee of 10 that became the Teachers Union. And we had a consolidated vision based on what had happened 100 years before with the first high school at Boston Latin around 1819.
So we're
so that
in another of those moments.
We are now,
right.
Twice in our country's history, have we reinvented high school. Your foundation ushering in the second that made equity matter and made all real and made the basis of not just our democracy, but an egalitarian democracy that actually came to fruition with our civil rights laws and the Elementary and Secondary Education Act and the Higher Ed Act and Pell Grants that said it matters that we all have access to this order of education that will make us thinkers and better people and a more tolerant society and the beacon of the world. So to add to that, you ramble, I can ramble, especially about this, because this is American ingenuity. The legacy of that created it, coming together to say with an equity-minded focus, as adolescent learning, you say neuroscience, we now know it's never too late, and high school is not too late. In fact, the best scientists in the world have shown us that you can change an IQ.
I think Pam
So
Cantor
to
is
do it
here.
again.
She would give an amen to neuroplasticity.
Yeah, right?
Part of the neuro.
Thank you.
Right? Part of the
Thank you.
the new opportunity set. But tell us about the partnership. You guys announced this groundbreaking partnership, XQ and Carnegie. What's it about? What are you trying to accomplish?
So at the heart of it is, I think, as Russlynn is suggesting, this opportunity now with the confluence of many forces and many of the people and forces in here in the room is is to say, what would it take to make learning for everybody in high school legitimately engaging, experiential, rigorous, applied? What would it take to build that sort of architecture in the same way the Carnegie Unit built an architecture that we all know and live in today? And XQ had been working on this for a decade, basically, or almost, when Russlynn and I had our first conversation when I landed in this position. And we said, well, why don't we partner and build a coalition of allies across the country in educators, civil rights organizations, state leaders, makers, commercial sector. Why don't we partner and build that coalition and see if we can bring to bear a new educational architecture? And at the very high level, it's let's change or refine the goals for schooling, the core purposes of schooling. In my view, that's broadening the aperture. Yes, disciplinary knowledge, but also a set of other things that we know are essential to prevail in life. So that's number one, is align on a set of goals for young people. Number two is think hard about what are their learning experiences. And in my oversimplified critique of the standards movement over the last 40 years is that we set up standards on the front end and accountability on the back end and assumed everything in the middle would magically attend to itself. So things like curriculum and teacher development and how we actually think about assessment for learning. And it really didn't, or didn't for everybody, important as it was. So learning experiences, what actually young people do every day, what the high school canon is a variable too. And the third, then I'm done, are the signals that the system sends to young people, the signaling system that would enable them to continue to learn. And the signals that the system sends to the families that would enable them to support their young people learn. And the signals that we send and develop for educators, and then how we make all of those signals legible to the postsecondary sector and employers. So what we have called assessment, which I would argue isn't yet that, should really be rooted in a conception of what we're trying to get at, which broadens the aperture, and a commitment to building insights that are actionable, so that people actually can continuously improve. And we're not there yet.
We're getting there, though. Russlynn, I'd love to have you reiterate the new architecture. Tim listed off 3 really important things. I want you to do your version. How would you articulate the new building blocks of the next phase of education?
Okay, but I'm also going to try not to ramble. So you talked about goals. You talked about learning experiences. You talked about measurements. It is just that. Building on the amazing work that we have done as a country to identify what all students should know and be able to do to be college and career ready at the end of high school. But as we think about them in terms of learner outcomes, as we embed the neuroscience and the teaching and social emotional learning and our skills, we need to be generous collaborators to solve tough problems. We need to be learners for life. Of course, we have to be masters of all fundamental literacy. We call these the XQ learner outcomes and more. You talk about learning experiences. How do we make the love of teaching and the love of learning collide? How do we make the environment of teaching and learning and knowledge acquisition, especially at the high school level, exciting and fun. We are seeing examples of that everywhere. Again, new technologies are making this possible. And measurements. We have to know whether we are continuously improving our system. We have to know whether we are actually teaching and young people are actually acquiring that knowledge in holistic ways. We have to think about schooling, and there are examples from XQ schools, of which I am biased, that defy even our highest and wildest expectations on what can be done for all kids with no one-size-fits-all model, but with a set of learner outcomes and design principles, flipping conventional school design on its head with students at the center. So it is the proliferation of more of these models. It's also what I had the great privilege of witnessing this morning at breakfast with leaders from the state chief Jenner in Indiana to the state chief Angelica Infante Green in Rhode Island. When we talk about apolitical and bipartisan and co-authorship of what is right for young people, we are seeing the magic in our states. We are seeing new secondary regulations passed that transform not just how we're doing high school, but how students access high school. Courses that are about applied learning and experiential learning that have very different course names, completely defying the Carnegie Unit in real time, with a state chief that is saying we're going to make this available to everybody. And of course, young people need to be ready to get there by the end of 8th grade. And so the high school that is the fulcrum is driving change throughout. With, by the way, more public participation than ever before in school regulation and public rulemaking in Rhode Island. There is a renewal of faith and hope in our public education system that every one of us, regardless of where we sit on the political spectrum, knows is necessary. So we are seeing that new architecture already in play. Our job as academics, as supporters, as empowerers, is to make the Nikki Wallaces of the world. These are teachers that are heroes and nation builders in Memphis, Tennessee, that are showing us what is possible with diversity as a design theory in how you get all kids to and through not just college, but beyond. So that new architecture is bearing witness to what we see, empowering, ensuring that every level of government supports and facilitates that, lifts up the stories of a State Chief Jenner and a State Chief Infante Green and a state leader like Louis Farabee in DC, and on and on and on. And you didn't introduce yourself properly, right? We learned this a lot when a new kind of leader took over Seattle public schools and helped change a game and change a nation, and that was you. So it is about the coalition, but it's about building and evolving. And again, our added value to the sweat, blood, and tears that so many of us in this room and beyond have spent ensuring equity in academia and national goals, actually shared a common vision, and that we didn't need to fight with the educators charged with doing this hard work in order to make it happen.
It does feel like there's interesting movement afoot. You mentioned some of the teacher associations. It feels like the AFT is really supportive of project-based learning. And speaking of new signaling, I'm on the DigiLearn board, and we have a We have a group of states that are advancing teacher micro-credentials. Guess who's the big sponsor of that work? It's the NEA. They're really supportive of personalized learning for teachers, captured
100%.
with a new set of credentials. So there are new partnerships being formed around this new vision of better articulated learning goals, powerful learning experiences like we see at so many of the XQ schools, and new credentialing systems. Did you mention ETS, but how would they fit in and what are they working on? And
So we're partnered with ETS, and I guess I would just back up quickly and say one of the things I love about working with ETS is I feel like I have 3,000 extra employees that I don't actually have to supervise. So it's a great partnership in that way. I'm kidding. The one thing ETS did recently was look at the portraits of a graduate and portraits of a learner that are springing up from schools and school systems and states across the country. And one of the things they found was that across states, red, blue, purple, across class, across race, across rural and urban, Americans are, and these portraits, as many people here know, are basically articulations of what we want young people to be by the time they're finished with K-12. There's incredible consistency across our nation in terms of what our expectations are, what the core purpose of school is. And that should be a source of optimism, because there's a demand for schools to pay attention to things like collaboration, like communication, like whether young people work hard, critical thinking, creative thinking, digital literacy, civic engagement. These are things that are showing up everywhere in our.
I worry about how many of them are showing up, but the cool thing is that if you trust the process and have that conversation, communities small and large come up with the right answer.
That's exactly my point.
And
I mean, and it's the saying right answer should be underlined, because there's really unequivocal empirical evidence around these skills, in addition to knowledge, being predictive of the things that we care about: health, lifespan, educational attainment, having children with higher levels of educational attainment, participating in democracy, the things that actually build a nation. So America wants that. We know it predicts the right things. We know employers are demanding these things. They've been calling these things different things since I was born. They used to be called soft skills. Do you remember that? Then they became 21st century skills until the 21st century came, and then we had to change them. For a minute, they became non-cognitive skills, which was a weird one, because
they're the most cognitive of all.
Like itching is cognitive, blinking is cognitive, like everything. Anyway, so now they're durable, they're transferable, whatever they are, but they are very, very, very consistent. And employers are saying, not only are they in high demand now, they anticipate there'll be even higher demand tomorrow. So the project with ETS is basically an R&D project that says, can we, with practitioners, learn how to reliably and credibly assess these things, whether the learning happens in the schoolhouse or outside? Because if we can do that, then we know everybody learns everywhere, but we don't actually have, until parents have the confidence that what learning is happening wherever it's happening, and until that learning has currency in the real world, we risk being stuck with the Carnegie Unit, where time is a proxy.
The new currency, will those assessments turn into credentials and that ride on learner records, and will that be the architecture that sort of pushes courses and transcripts into the background?
I mean, I think I'm being pragmatist. I think we need both. I think we're going to need both. I think there's going to be need for people to see familiar things in terms of a transcript, for example. But what is a transcript can change. Yeah. What is on a diploma?
Russlynn, I think about Purdue Polytech. One of the first examples that I've seen, maybe outside of big picture schools, Julie, when I go to Gibson Eck, I see this, where courses have sort of moved into the background And the work that students do in powerful projects aiming at important competencies is in the foreground. It's how they structure student learning and schedule the day, and maybe that adds up to a course, but that's in the background. Is that what this is about?
Well, it's certainly defying space and time as the construct for how and we learn.
At least, yeah, organizing those in new and different ways.
But there are states that are leading this. I mean, we are partnering with Rhode Island, with
you guys had a
with
convening
Kentucky,
about
with
a week
Idaho.
ago. Yes, with
not
states.
too long ago. Listen,
How many states came?
because there are states that are and are co-constructed with teachers at Grand Rapids Museum High School, both defying space and time, because
Yeah.
their curriculum is based on 250,000 historical and cultural artifacts around an industry that is decimated because oysters used to power a community that it doesn't any longer. We can go on and on. We constructed a math program that allows all of this kind of asynchronous learning that we are talking about. That is fun. There are
in and
4
out of
states
school,
piloting
right?
it
Yeah.
for alternative young people, but also the highest performing.
Yeah.
That allows, you can start with what we would today in a Carnegie world called pre-algebra. In a post-Carnegie world, we will accept the science of learning and know you need algebraic function as early as the 2nd grade, all the way up. But preparing young people as they enter in high school to get a class called algebra, all the way through data science and statistics, some in a linear sequential way, because polynomials might require that, but that allows a set of badges. Gone are the days where we ought to require 6-hour blocks, 180 days a year, that will teach someone a gatekeeper course that the late Bob Moses called one of the civil rights issues of our generation, algebra as a civil right, because in a Carnegie Unit world, unless you get it early, you will never get the rest of the courses that simply allow you to have a great job. There are states that are defying this already, that are busting through it, that are credentialing with a new way beyond grades and discretion.
You're in part talking about XQ Math as an example. How can people find out about that? Just Google XQ Math?
You should be like a poster next to me all the time.
But so XQ Math is really cool because it's
that is one example. XQ Math is one example.
new
It
goals,
is a course,
new experiences,
but we are
and
also
new
we can look at
credentials.
places like Reconstruction or X in a Box. Reconstruction, founded by a former district leader that is looking at these learning experiences. That's Kaya Henderson, shout out. That are looking at these learning experiences and finding new ways to deliver it. We are partnering with ASU and the School of Education there to develop a curriculum for teachers around project-based learning that shows how to do what Nikki Wallace has done with a Mars project that is as much geometry as it is algebra, as it is algebra 2, as it is ethics, as it is literature, and prepare teachers to be able to do that at scale. So all of that to say, it is happening. It needs to be supercharged.
All right.
Federal policy gives us the opportunity
We're going
to
to
do
do
it
that in
now.
just a second. I want to just say, the states, it's very cool. They're red and blue. Some that you'd expect, some that you wouldn't. States are on the move and excited about this new architecture. Yes?
Definitely.
And talk about the policy opportunity coming up, because there's 3 really big authorizations. We're talking
more. It's been way too long since we reauthorized the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, today known as ESSA. Way too long since we reauthorized Perkins, the Workforce Investment Act, what we used to call CTE. Way too long since we reauthorized higher education. Way too long since we had an unprecedented, and now is the time for an coordinated strategy amongst agencies. We're not just talking about Pell. We're not just talking about, because if you're learning, as they're doing in Indiana, they have rates that defy most other states of folks that are actually learning and earning college credit in high school. So way too long since we have thought about Pell in a different way, in a coordinated way, to ensure that these $90 billion annually, so what are we calling for? In the same way we've seen historic change. How about we think about a fund for community and high school prosperity grants that allow communities empowered with knowledge, with modules to dream smart about high schools, what high schools should be, to lead to catalytic improvements in their own neighborhoods. We now have models and know-how from across the country on how to do it. We need unprecedented resources in measurement and R&D for holistic measurement that actually measures both teachers and young people fairly in a new way of interdisciplinary learning. And we need to think about, third, we need to think about how we, you say asynchronously, workplace learning, experiential learning. We have enough know-how. The federal government in these dollars can catapult the magic we are seeing in states. Now is the time, regardless of what happens in November. None of the people in this room are waiting for an election to determine what is right for our young people. And it doesn't matter where we sit. These are dollars that made our democracy what it is, and these are dollars that'll catapult us into the cure of what ails so much of the isms that plague us today.
So just what you taught me 25 years ago, that policy advocacy matters. It feels like we have a new opportunity to work together to help shape those priorities, a giant high school grant program, more R&D, better measurement. Your partnership is a big part of getting that started. Thank Tim and Russlynn for their time and their partnership.